Yubari to turn and steam away. She returns fire, her shells straddling Battery A. As Yubari retreats, Battery A strikes her port side, and she immediately begins to belch smoke. She sustains a further 2 hits as she turns to try to evade the incoming fire. Patrol boats 32 and 33, escorting Yubari, attempt to lay a smoke screen behind her as she desperately tries to sail towards safety. In doing so, Patrol boat 33 is herself struck by a shell, forcing her to retreat as Yubari receives further hits to her forward turret. As Yubari duels with Battery A, Battery L now opens fire on Destroyer Division 29 and Cruiser Division 18. Having executed a westerly turn from their run towards the southern beach, the leading ship, Hayate, comes under fire from Battery L, exploding and splitting her in 2. Within minutes, her 167-man crew disappear beneath the waves. Hayate becomes the first Japanese surface vessel to be sunk by the US Navy during the Second World War. Battery L immediately turns to the Oite, which by now is close enough to engage with their 50 caliber machine guns. Oite lays a smokescreen and retreats, struck once by American guns. The remaining ships of Destroyer Division 29 follow Oite's lead, sustaining multiple punishing hits from Battery L. Meanwhile, Destroyer Division 30 now comes within range of Battery B, which opens fire, scoring hits against the Yayoi, Matsuki, and Kisaragi. Again, all are forced to retreat to safety. With Kajioka's invasion fleet fleeing south beyond the range of Wake's guns, the 4 Marine Wildcats dive in to punish the retreating vessels. Destroyer Kisaragi is singled out, and is struck by bombs which penetrate her deck. The explosions within the ship immediately render Kisaragi a raging inferno. The remaining Wildcats dive on cruisers Tenru and Tatsuta, scoring accurate hits on both. Kisaragi changes from a ship to a ball of flame. It doesn't take long for her to disintegrate in a violent explosion, and she sinks to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The evasion attempt has been a total failure for the Japanese, losing 2 destroyers and 407 casualties. But while the Americans on the island enjoy their success, their situation is still precarious. Aerial bombardment will continue between the 12th and 22nd of December. Desperately needed resupply and equipment will not arrive, and the bombing will hit and degrade all of the island's defences. Works on the island defences continue, as Japanese reconnaissance aircraft track progress. To make matters worse, Task Force 14 is still some 3 days from Wake. Its speed is limited by its slowest ship, the oiler USS Neches. The US submarine group is ordered to leave to avoid unnecessary risk. With news arriving of a heavy concentration of aviation in the Marshall Islands, and reported Japanese carrier aircraft from one or many undiscovered Japanese carriers spotted over Wake, Task Force 11 is diverted to support Task Force 14 en route. The time has run out. On the 21st of December, the skies above Wake fill with Japanese carrier aircraft from the fleet carriers Hiryu and Soryu. 29 IG bombers and 18 Zero fighters strike the island's defences. With Japanese carriers now confirmed in the area without doubt, Task Forces 14 and 11 are ordered to abandon their relief mission to Wake. The US carriers can't be risked against what could be a superior enemy force, and must be withdrawn to fight another day. Desperately needed men, ammunition, aircraft and equipment will never arrive. The 400 men of the 1st Marine Defence Battalion on Wake Island are alone. On the night of the 22nd of December, Rear Admiral Kajioka's much reinforced fleet arrives for a second and heavily committed attempt to take the island. At his disposal are the carriers Hiryu, Soryu, heavy cruisers Tone, Chikuma, Alba, Keiko and Furitaka, light cruisers Yubari, Tatsuta and Tenru, 9 destroyers, the 2 patrol boats 32 and 33, and 4 auxiliary ships. At midnight, lookouts witness vivid irregular flashes, cruisers Tenru and Tatsuta conducting diversionary bombardments. The Japanese Marines are going to attempt a night amphibious assault, aiming to take out the defensive guns on Wake using ground forces. Immediately, reports from Peacock Point arrive of barge-like shapes in the darkness offshore. Hearing these reports, Lieutenant Poindexter deploys his men in a defensive line at the end of the airstrip. At Camp 1, another defensive line is established north and south of the airfield access road facing east. To prevent any Japanese advance west, Lieutenant Cleaver's men are also dug in. Northwest of them lies 2 machine gun positions covering the airstrip, with another 2 positioned on the eastern end. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Hanna and Major Putnam arrive at the southern beach and man a 3-inch gun. With the sounds of landing craft approaching and the searchlights now illuminated, Patrol Boat 32 and 33 are spotted fast approaching the southern shore of Wilkes Island. Wake's defences open up, with machine guns peppering the incoming boats. As the patrol boats slam onto the beach, Japanese Marines disembark and charge ashore under the fire from Lieutenant Poindexter's men. Spotting Patrol Boat 32, Hanna engages with his 3-inch gun, the first shells striking the bridge's superstructure. Hanna fires a further 14 shells until the patrol boat detonates in a violent explosion, with Japanese men of the Ukida and Italia companies still disembarking. Those of the Ukida company who make it ashore advance eastward until they encounter Putnam's defensive line, which holds. With a confused situation, and not knowing that 1,500 Japanese Marines are in the process of coming ashore, or even their landing locations, Major Devereaux presumes the landings are focused on the southern shore, and orders a section of reinforcements from Battery D to the command bunker. Meanwhile, the blazing Patrol Boat 32 illuminates a portion of the Ukida advancing towards the airstrip. Immediately, Poindexter's machine gun sections engage the enemy, forcing them to disappear back into the darkness. Simultaneously, machine gun fire erupts from Camp 1, where machine gun positions begin to engage enemy landing craft attempting to cross the reef and land east of Wilkes Channel. To add to the confusion, Japanese troops somewhere in the darkness sever overground communication lines, isolating the dispersed American defences and hindering their ability to react quickly and in a coordinated manner. Putnam's men are under such pressure that they are forced to retreat. To Putnam's east, another company of Japanese Marines comes ashore between Peacock Point and his position. Now surrounded and with nowhere else to go, he remarks, "This is as far as we go. Putnam's position will stand and fight." Meanwhile, Batteries A and E now come under mortar and machine gun fire. Japanese troops have crossed the airstrip towards the lagoon and attack the Battery E position. Battery E successfully silences an enemy machine gun, but the incoming fire persists, forcing Lieutenant Lewis to aggressively take a squad of infantry forward against them. After 50 yards, Lewis's squad is forced to ground, forming a new ad hoc defensive line. The machine gun sections east of the airstrip and on the eastern shore now begin to engage Japanese forces advancing up the short road. Meanwhile, Poindexter's men are finally overwhelmed and withdraw towards Camp 1. As dawn breaks, Putnam's men are completely enveloped by the Japanese. With Wake under increasing pressure, a new defensive line is formed south of the command post. As daybreak comes, Lieutenant Cleaver's position repels a bayonet charge, killing numerous Japanese soldiers. Over on Peel Island, only Battery B remains under the command of Lieutenant Kessler. In the daylight, they spot Japanese ensigns on Wilkes Island, however this does not dissuade them. They spot and open fire on Patrol Boat 33, setting her alight. The ships of Destroyer Division 30 follow and move within range of Battery B. Battery B, still fighting with hard determination, opens fire, striking Matsuki and forcing the destroyers to retreat. In the skies above, carrier aircraft now arrive to strike the island defences. With all of the Wildcats now destroyed and only one AA position remaining, the bombers will be free to attack their positions near unmolested. The position on Wake is now untenable. Multiple sections are surrounded, communications are degraded, Japanese aircraft are arriving above, the horizon is filling with heavily armed warships, and enemy troops are now advancing on the command post itself. Commander of all US forces on the island, Commander Cunningham, takes the decision that Wake Island will immediately surrender to Japanese forces. At the Battle of Wake Island, 52 Americans are killed, 12 aircraft lost, and a further 433 captured. Killed Wildcat pilot Captain Henry Elwood, credited with the sinking of destroyer Kisaragi and several other heroic actions during the defensive wake, is awarded a posthumous Medal of Honor. The Japanese lose 2 destroyers, 2 patrol boats, and take over 400 casualties. This significant outpost in the centre of the Pacific Ocean now allows the Imperial Japanese Navy and Air Force to exert their influence toward Midway and the Johnston Atoll, and threatens any US naval forces that transit in between. Wake would remain in Japanese hands until the end of the war. Play War Thunder for free on PC, PS5 and Xbox Series X and S. Follow the link to download the game and get a free premium tank, aircraft or ship and 3 days of premium now. At 8:48 on the 2nd of April 1942, the USS Hornet aircraft carrier steams under the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco and heads out to sea with her escort fleet. 16 B-25 Mitchell medium bombers can be seen on her flight deck. The locals assume the bombers are simply being transported to Hawaii. After all, bombers of that size are surely far too large to be able to actually take off from an aircraft carrier. In December 1941, the Empire of Japan attacked the US Navy base at Pearl Harbor, bringing the United States into World War II. Simultaneously, Japan also took the US territories of Guam, the Philippines, and Wake Island. The American people were furious at these attacks on their territories and demanded revenge. President Roosevelt inquired about the feasibility of bombing raids on Japan. The US needed a morale boost. However, the loss of airfields on the occupied Pacific Islands rendered the US unable to reach Japan with the range of its conventional bomber air power. At a naval airfield in Virginia, testing was carried out whereby the outline of the deck of an aircraft carrier was drawn out on a runway, and medium bombers attempted to take off within the required distance of 467 feet. It was possible with major modifications, but only just. An attempt in the high seas of the Pacific Ocean would be quite a different matter. Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle, an engineer before the war and now famous military test pilot, sketched out a plan where medium bombers would take off from an aircraft carrier off the coast of Japan and strike the greater Tokyo area. Landing back on the aircraft carrier after the raid would be impossible, so he considered that the strike and land in the Soviet Union, turning the aircraft over to the Soviet Air Force as lead release. However, while the Soviets were fighting with the Allies in the war against Germany, they were still neutral with Japan. Stalin did not want a second front to open in the Far East with Japan at a time when Germany was hammering the Soviet Union to the west. Doolittle revised his plan to land the aircraft in China. With the B-25s modified for long-range operations, they were craned onto the deck of the USS Hornet, and on the 2nd of April, the ship steamed west. The force from San Francisco, Task Force 18, consists of the USS Hornet aircraft carrier, cruisers Nashville and Vincennes, oiler Cimarron, and destroyers Wynne, Meredith, Monson, and Grayson. On the 8th of April, the oiler Cimarron refuels the destroyers, whose range is limited, in stormy seas. In Pearl Harbor, Task Force 16, led by Admiral Halsey, puts to sea, made up of the USS Enterprise aircraft carrier, cruisers Northampton and Salt Lake City, oiler Sabine, and destroyers Balch, Benin, Ellet, and Fanning. The fleet leaves the Navy base and heads towards grid reference 38 North, 180 East. They are to rendezvous with Task Force 18 on the 13th of April, before the combined fleet heads west. Thousands of miles away, off the coast of Japan, the USS submarines Trout and Thresher have been attacking and sinking Japanese merchant shipping. They monitor the weather and feed back radio reports to the fleet. On the 17th, the task force is 800 miles from the Japanese coast. All ships resupply from the oilers Cimarron and Sabine. The two oilers then turn east for home. The destroyers hold at this position to save valuable fuel for the later voyage home. The rest of the task force continues west. The carrier USS Enterprise is providing air cover to the fleet, as the USS Hornet cannot launch any of its own combat wing, while the bombers take up the deck space. recon aircraft are launched to search an area 200 miles ahead of the fleet for hostile shipping. At 3 a.m. on the 18th of April, the fleet detects 2 surface radar contacts at 20,000 yards distance. Halsey orders a course change away to avoid detection. At 4 a.m., the fleet resumes its course towards Japan. At sunrise, air patrols resume from the Enterprise. This time, 3 Dauntless dive bombers are also dispatched to search for the surface contacts detected overnight. 1 aircraft sights a ship at 42 miles ahead of the task force and drops a note onto the deck of the Enterprise so as to preserve radio silence. At 8 a.m., the fleet spots the Japanese patrol craft Nita Maru at 10,000 yards. The USS Nashville opens fire and sinks the craft, but not before it was able to radio back a warning to the Japanese homeland. Enemy carriers spotted. Admiral Halsey realizes the element of surprise has been lost, and every minute passed is a minute longer the Japanese military has to prepare for the attack. 10 hours early, and 170 miles further away than planned, he gives the order to launch the bombers. First into the air, Doolittle leads the 16 B-25 Mitchells in successfully completing the perilous takeoff. Remarkably, no aircraft are lost, and the bombers set course for Tokyo. The task force turns back to the east, knowing there are further patrol craft in the area ready to radio back the location of the fleeing ships to long-range bombers on the mainland. With the B-25s launched, Hornet can now launch its own air wing to help defend the fleet. Over the next few hours, Hornet launches 8 Wildcat fighters on combat air patrols, and Enterprise launches Dauntlesses in 200-mile search patterns for enemy ships. Enterprise detects Japanese recon aircraft at long range, but they turn away. At 2 p.m., the fleet spots 2 patrol craft to the north. Dauntlesses attack and destroy the first, but return fire from the craft damages 1 Dauntless, which crashes into the sea near the USS Nashville. The Nashville closes in and destroys the remaining ship with the aid of dive bombers from Hornet. To the west, the 16 bombers are approaching the Japanese coast. They split into 5 formations. The first will hit northern Tokyo, the second central Tokyo, the third southern Tokyo. The fourth spreads out over a 50-mile front on its way to Kanagawa, Yokohama, and Yokosuka Navy Base. The fifth will hit Nagoya and Kobe. The first 3 flights, 13 aircraft, surround Tokyo and run in from different directions. The targets are selected military and civilian factories and oil refineries, notably the Nippon Electric Company and the Mitsubishi Aircraft Company. Japanese observer posts have spotted the bombers crossing the coast, and an intercepting fighter force comprising Zeros, Ki-27s and Ki-61s have been scrambled. The targets selected are specifically chosen for their scattered nature throughout the greater Tokyo area. The plan is to cause as much shock to civilians as possible across the widest possible area. Nearly all bombers are pursued and attacked by multiple fighters. Doolittle himself is attacked by 9 enemy aircraft. The city's anti-aircraft batteries open a desperate barrage of fire on the bombers, but their low altitude and flight paths make them impossible targets. The gunners on the US aircraft claim 5 fighters shot down in self-defense. It's a defensive disaster for the Japanese, who score no bombers destroyed. Nearly all planned targets are hit, including damage to an aircraft carrier in dry dock at Yokosuka. 2 aircraft attack multiple targets in Nagoya. They encounter heavy anti-aircraft fire before bombing a military barracks, an oil storage facility, and 2 aircraft factories. The last aircraft follows the coastline into the port of Kobe and drops bombs on a steel works, electric works, and the Kawasaki dockyard and aircraft factory. All bombers except 1 turn for China to make their escape. Captain Edward York's aircraft makes for the Soviet Union. An administrative error led to unauthorized modifications to York's engine carburetors before leaving the US mainland. This means that fuel consumption is vastly higher than has been planned for, and China will now be 300 miles out of range.
York's crew has no choice but to make for Vladivostok in the Soviet Union. They would eventually land safely, but are interned by the Soviet Union. A month later, the Soviet government would stage their supposed escape near the Iranian border, allowing the crew to travel to the British consulate in Iran. The crew would return home soon after, without the Soviets appearing to have broken the neutrality agreement with Japan. All crews are forced to bail out near or before their planned landing areas in China, thanks to unusually high wind and fog. When communicating the plan to the Chinese military in the days leading up to the attack, a mistake was made by US planners, forgetting that the raid would involve crossing the international date line. The Chinese had been told to await the bombers. All but 2 crews aiming for China returned home with help from the Chinese. Doolittle received the Medal of Honor as leader of the raid. The other 2 crews were captured by the Japanese. Regretfully, after a military trial, 3 of the crew members were executed, with another dying of malnutrition in prison. Japanese reprisals on China for harbouring the crews were severe, launching Operation Saigo in May to occupy the coastal areas to prevent their use as a bomber landing area again. Estimates for civilian fatalities during the campaign range from 70 to 250,000 people. There was a major boost to American morale. More importantly, the Japanese High Command now considered their coastline vulnerable to attack. They would attempt to take the Pacific Islands of Midway 2 months later to try to hinder US carrier operations against their mainland in the future. The resulting Battle of Midway would be a crippling defeat for the Japanese Navy and decisive in the war in the Pacific.
This video is sponsored by Call of War, a free online player versus player strategy game where you can lead a real nation during World War II. Research and make best use of tanks, aircraft and other weapons to fight with up to 100 real players at a time in exciting real-time combat. Declare war on your neighbours or forge alliances as strong as the Allies in World War II. Fight battles and take over the world in hard-fought campaigns that can last weeks. Call of War is cross-platform, so you can compete with your friends on both PC and mobile on the same account to find out who is the ultimate general. The Operations Room fans who sign up by clicking the unique link below will receive 13,000 gold and a month of premium subscription completely free. Don't miss out, as the offer is only available for 30 days, so click the link in the description below, choose your country, and start fighting your way to victory. It's the 1st of May 1942, and sailing out of the foreboding Japanese naval bastion in the central Pacific, Truk Lagoon, is a carrier striking force centered on the fleet carriers Shokaku and Suikaku, escorted by a force of heavy cruisers and destroyers. They are the strike force of Task Force MO and are sailing in conjunction with 4 more Japanese naval task forces as part of Operation MO. The ambitious and complex plan is to result in the seizure of Port Moresby on the south coast of the territory of Papua. Seizing Port Moresby will extend Japan's defensive perimeter even further into the South Pacific, provide Japanese aircraft an invaluable base from which to attack Allied supply lines to Australia, and to attack Australia itself. However, US Navy codebreakers at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor warn that the Japanese are likely about to launch an operation against Port Moresby. Given the supreme strategic importance of Port Moresby, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Ocean Area, Admiral Chester Nimitz, knows it has to be defended. Nimitz orders fleet carriers USS Yorktown with Task Force 17 and USS Lexington with Task Force 11, commanded by Rear Admiral Frank Fletcher, to steam to the Coral Sea. Nimitz's orders are clear: check further the advance of the enemy in the New Guinea Solomon area by destroying enemy ships, shipping and aircraft. For the Japanese, overseeing the delicate operation is 4th Fleet Commander Vice Admiral Inoue. The forces under his command, Task Force MO, is widely dispersed over the region. The Tulagi invasion force will sail to the island of Tulagi, north of the soon-to-be famous island of Guadalcanal, and establish a seaplane base there on May the 3rd, facilitating long-range reconnaissance of the area. The Port Moresby invasion force is to sail toward the Louisiade archipelago, through the Jomard Pass and capture Port Moresby on May the 10th. Both invasion forces will be covered by the MO Main Force, comprised of the light carrier Shoho, escorted by heavy cruisers and a destroyer. A covering force will establish seaplane bases to scout for the Japanese task forces as they progress toward Port Moresby, first at Boyne Island, then at Cape Rodney. Finally, the objective of the MO Carrier Striking Force is to destroy any American aircraft carriers the Japanese increasingly suspect are lurking in the region. In order to avoid detection by Allied reconnaissance aircraft, the carriers will sail north of the Solomons and enter the Coral Sea to the east of San Cristobal Island. But first, the Carrier Striking Force begins the straightforward secondary mission of reinforcing the Japanese base at Rabaul with 9 Zero fighter aircraft. But after takeoff, bad weather forces the Zeros back, compelling the Carrier Striking Force to remain in the area and try again the next day, delaying their progress by 1 day. In the meantime, American Army Air Force's reconnaissance aircraft are reporting that Japanese warships are sailing down towards the eastern Solomons. These sightings are verified with new intelligence from Station Hypo that indicates the Japanese intend to seize Tulagi. On May the 3rd, the Tulagi invasion force occupies the undefended island and promptly begins work to construct a seaplane ramp. Meanwhile, bad weather intervenes again to stop the Carrier Striking Force successfully delivering the 9 Zeros to Rabaul. Determined to achieve air superiority over the Allies at Port Moresby, the delivery of the Zeros to Rabaul is regarded as crucial, and the carriers remain in the area. Further south is Admiral Fletcher's Task Force 17, with Task Force 11 following not far behind as the Lexington finishes refueling. At 7 p.m, Fletcher receives the first report of the Japanese arrival at Tulagi. He hopes he can strike the Tulagi invasion force at the exact point it is most exposed, unloading men and material off the coast. Fletcher moves Task Force 17 north to be in position the following morning to attack the Japanese at Tulagi, believing Lexington of Task Force 11 to still be refueling. At dawn, on the 4th of May, Task Force 17 arrives 100 miles south of Guadalcanal. At just after 7 a.m, the first of a 40 aircraft strike takes off from the Yorktown. A force of 28 Dauntless SBD dive bombers and 12 Devastator TBD torpedo bombers fly toward Tulagi, overflying Guadalcanal en route. They fly over Guadalcanal's central heights and over the stretch of sea that will in the coming months see fierce naval fighting, earning the nickname Iron Bottom Sound. At 8:20 a.m, they launch their attack on the Japanese warships off Tulagi. Although Japanese flak is very light, the attack is uncoordinated. The SBD dive bomber pilots find their bomb sights fogging up as they dive on their targets, whilst the TBD torpedo bomber pilots equally struggle to strike accurately. Throughout May the 4th, 3 more strikes are launched against Tulagi, and Yorktown's flyers report that they have sunk or heavily damaged over 10 Japanese warships, including a number of cruisers. However, the truth is much less spectacular, and having expended a vast amount of munitions, only the destroyer Kikusaki and a few small auxiliary warships have actually been sunk. Seeking to avoid a potential Japanese counterstrike, Fletcher moves Task Force 17 south at speed. As soon as Admiral Takagi, commanding the Carrier Strike Force, is informed of the attack, he suspends his own refueling and moves his task force southeast with hopes of finding an American carrier. But by daybreak on May the 5th, Task Force 17 has regrouped with Task Force 11, and together they move southeast as the Yorktown is refueled. At 1100 hours, a Type 97 flying boat is shot down by a Wildcat from Yorktown. Although it does not report back to headquarters, the failure of the aircraft to return gives the Japanese an inclination as to where an American carrier could be. By evening of May the 5th, the Japanese Carrier Striking Force enters the Coral Sea. By May the 6th, Fletcher decides to merge his 2 task forces into Task Force 17, bringing the now single task force to 2 fleet carriers, 8 cruisers and 11 destroyers in strength. At 10:30 a.m, with Task Force 17 following a course towards the Louisiade Archipelago, another Japanese Type 97 flying boat, which is picked up by American radar, sights and reports back the location of Task Force 17. However, the location report is off by 50 miles, and is received by the Carrier Striking Force as it is refueling. It is midday by the time it is able to head south in pursuit. Even so, the Japanese officer in tactical command of the carriers, Rear Admiral Hara, decides against mounting a long-range air search or strike, fearing that doing so will expose that Japanese carriers are now operating in the Coral Sea. Thus, as the carrier striking force moves south on the evening of May the 6th, Hara is completely blind to the fact that Task Force 17 is just 70 miles away, and at 7:30 p.m, the carrier striking force turns back to the north. Over on Task Force 17, after a day of fruitless reconnaissance sweeps for the Japanese forces and carriers that they believe are heading down the Solomon Sea towards the Louisiade archipelago, Fletcher is just as blind to the fact that the enemy's carriers are so close. But knowing the Japanese aircraft picked up on radar earlier in the day has likely exposed his position, and according to the Allied intelligence the Japanese will likely be transiting the Jomard Passage the next day, Fletcher increases the speed of Task Force 17, hoping to be in position on May the 7th to attack the Japanese task forces believed to be passing through the Louisiade archipelago. At sunrise on May the 7th, Task Force 17 is 150 miles south of Rossell Island. Allied reconnaissance aircraft and SBDs continue to search for the Japanese carriers meant to be operating south of Bougainville Island. Moreover, Fletcher chooses to dispatch 3 cruisers and 3 destroyers, commanded by British Rear Admiral Grace, to stop the MO invasion force getting through the Louisiade archipelago if the American carriers are neutralized. In turn, the Japanese dispatch seaplanes from Rabaul, Shortland and Tulagi, and from the recently secured De Boyne Island in an effort to locate any American carriers. The situation is becoming so pressing that Hara breaks with doctrine and orders 12 Kate carrier attack aircraft to search out 250 miles in front of the Japanese carriers. It seems likely that the first side to accurately locate and strike the enemy will ultimately prevail. Between 7:22 am and 7:45, 2 Japanese Kates finally report sighting an American carrier, escorted by a cruiser and 3 destroyers. Hara orders a strike, and just 30 minutes later a full strike package of 18 Zeros, 24 Kate torpedo bombers, and 26 Val dive bombers are en route to attack the American carrier. At this exact moment, Fletcher receives news an SBD has just reported sighting 2 Japanese carriers and 4 cruisers. Sighted out of range of most of his aircraft, Fletcher pushes Task Force 17 forward with the intention of launching a full strike at the first opportunity. As the Japanese aircraft arrive at the location of the reported American carrier, all they find is the lonely fleet oiler Neosho, escorted by the destroyer USS Sims, who had been ordered to relocate away from the danger the day before. Consequently, the Japanese aircraft spread out, hoping to locate more American warships. Even worse for the Japanese, a floatplane reports back to Hara that it has sighted an American carrier that is at this very moment launching a full strike. It has just caught sight of the 93 aircraft strong strike Task Force 17 has just launched, comprising 18 Wildcats, 53 SBDs and 22 TBDs. The Americans soon receive their own dose of confusion, as upon returning to Yorktown, the pilot who supposedly sighted the 2 Japanese carriers and 4 cruisers earlier denies that this was the report he transmitted, and that he actually only saw 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers. Only now does he realise his transmission was incorrectly coded. It dawns upon Fletcher that he has just sent his aircraft to attack a few unimportant Japanese warships. Fletcher berates the pilot, telling him, "You have just cost the United States 2 carriers." Despite this, Fletcher decides against recalling the strike, hoping his aircraft can attack the MO invasion force that he believes to be somewhere nearby. At 10:22 am, a land-based B-17 on a reconnaissance mission locates a carrier and 2 escorting warships just 35 miles southeast of the original sighting, and Task Force 17 aircraft are redirected. At almost the exact same time, the American fleet oiler Neosho reports being attacked by Japanese aircraft, adding even more confusion to the already confused situation. Fletcher, shocked, realises the Japanese carriers must be behind Task Force 17, albeit with their intention firmly in the wrong direction. With so many American aircraft patrolling the region, and now knowing that an American carrier force is nearby, Vice Admiral Inouye decides to turn the MO invasion force north, a course it will ultimately never return from. Adding to the potential danger, Rear Admiral Grace's Task Group 2 has been sighted south of the Jomard Passage, It must be eliminated before the Japanese can continue south. Near the Neosho and Sims, unable to find any more American warships, the Zeros and Capes depart the area, but the vows remain to sink the oiler and her escort. Sims becomes the target of the first 4 vows. They strike her with 3 550-pound bombs, cutting the destroyer in 2 and killing 178 of her 192 crew. Neosho then becomes the focus of the remaining vows, who smother her with 7 550-pound bombs, leaving only a third of her crew alive, and the ship a flaming wreck. Even so, Neosho will somehow remain afloat for 4 more days, when on May the 11th, an American destroyer finally rescues the remaining crew and scuttles the ship. As the Sims sinks and the Neosho burns, the American carrier aircraft get their first glimpse of a Japanese carrier in the distance. They have found the MO main force, including light carrier Shoho. The small carrier only has 3 fighters flying combat air patrol, a solitary Zero and 2 older Type 96 fighters. Spotting the approaching aircraft, Shoho's captain orders a sharp turn to port as SBDs from Lexington prepare their attack. 3 dive on the Shoho, but with the carrier turning sharply they all miss. A further 10 SBDs dive on the Shoho, but again all miss. Whilst Japanese anti-aircraft fire is proving ineffective, the lone Zero is able to shoot down an SBD pulling up from a dive. But Shoho's luck runs out, and the second group of Lexington's SBDs hit Shoho with 2 1,000-pound bombs. The explosions cause huge fires throughout her hangar deck. Now Lexington's TBDs begin their attack. Powering through a gap in the escorting cruisers, they press home with an anvil attack, striking the Shoho with 5 torpedoes. The impacts cause massive flooding and ensure that Shoho will sink. After the devastating attack by Lexington's aircraft, Yorktown's aircraft now arrive. Although Shoho is ablaze, flooding, and clearly neutralised, nearly all of Yorktown's 25 SBDs attack the stricken carrier, scoring another 11 confirmed 1,000-pound bomb hits. Shoho comes to an abrupt halt. Unable to move, she is then attacked by Yorktown's TBDs, who hit her with up to 10 more torpedoes. Under such an overwhelming attack, Shoho is simply blown to pieces and disappears beneath the waves, taking 631 of her 834 crew with her. Although Yorktown's flyers should have attacked Shoho's escorting cruisers, Fletcher's flyers have done well, with the Shoho being the first Japanese carrier sunk in the war. As the Americans return to their carriers, bad weather sets in, and Fletcher decides against launching another strike as the day draws in. Southeast of the Jomar Passage, Rear Admiral Grace's detached task group is attacked from land-based Japanese aircraft based at Rabaul, first by 12 torpedo-armed G3M bombers, who launched their torpedoes too early, with 5 being shot down. Then 19 more attacked from high altitude with bombs, and again all miss. Later they are even attacked by 3 US Army B-26 bombers, who again miss, leading Grace to comment, "Fortunately their bombing, like that of the Japanese a few minutes earlier, was disgraceful." With the destruction of Shoho, Admiral Inouye halts the advance of the MO invasion force for 2 days, judging the situation too risky to continue. For the Japanese, it is obvious from the number of aircraft used to sink the Shoho that 2 American carriers are active in the region. It is imperative that they are quickly eliminated if Operation MO is to succeed. The days leading up to this moment have been a classic example of the difficulties brought upon by the fog of war, human error, and blind luck, with both sides desperately trying to seek out and destroy the other whilst remaining hidden themselves. Thus far, the Japanese have lost a light carrier, destroyer, and a few smaller warships, whilst the Americans have lost a fleet oiler and a destroyer. Yet both carrier forces are still as determined as ever to seek out and destroy one another, and a great clash is inevitable. Tomorrow, the 8th of May 1942, a brutal carrier battle will rage in the Coral Sea. Call of War is a free online player versus player strategy game that takes place in World War II. Click the link in the description below for 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium for free. Choose your country and fight your way to victory today. With the presence of American aircraft carriers in the region, and the swift destruction of the light carrier Shoho on the morning of May 7, 1942, Admiral Inouye, commander of Task Force MO, has decided to turn the MO invasion force north until the American carriers are eliminated. For Vice Admiral Takagi and Rear Admiral Hara, commanding the carrier striking force, it's obvious from the number of aircraft used to sink the Shoho that 2 American carriers are in the region. These 2 carriers must be quickly eliminated if Operation MO is to succeed. Therefore, Rear Admiral Hara chooses to gamble and at 4:15 p.m. launches a strike of 12 Val dive bombers and 15 Kate torpedo bombers 280 miles west in an effort to find and attack the American carriers. The strike could potentially prove highly successful, but many of the Japanese pilots are tired after the strike on the Neosho in Sims, and now face a dangerous mission which will end with a tired landing back on their carriers. The Japanese aircraft fly the 280 miles west, but are unable to find Task Force 17 through the heavy cloud cover. They release their ordnance and hope to make it back to their carriers safely. But little do they know, they have been detected by American radar, and Wildcat fighters are now being guided in to intercept them. The Wildcats, who have positioned themselves behind the formation of Japanese aircraft, strike out of the setting sun and shoot down a Val and 6 of the Capes for the loss of 3 of the attacking Wildcats. Flying through the dark and sighting carriers ahead, some of the Japanese aircraft even try to land on the American carriers. As a Japanese aircraft attempts to land on the Yorktown, the pilot finally realizes his mistake and hastily aborts the approach. The US warships open fire, shooting down the further aircraft. With 9 of the 27 Japanese shot down, their mission is a costly failure. With this encounter, and with the Japanese airmen reporting the position of Task Force 17 on their arrival back to their carriers, it is now clear to both sides just how close they actually are to one another. After days of searching for one another, the atmosphere in both fleets is thick with tension, both knowing that the following day will see the climax of the battle. The following morning of May the 8th, at 6:15 a.m, 7 Kates launched from the Japanese carrier striking force in search of the American carriers. In turn, 20 minutes later, 18 Dauntless SBD dive bombers launch a 360-degree search from Task Force 17. At around 8:20 a.m, both American and Japanese aircraft find what they're looking for, and simultaneously issue reports identifying the location of their enemy's carriers. Crucially, the bad weather that had been shielding the American carriers has now moved north to cover the Japanese carriers. The Americans are first to launch a full strike. At 9:25 a.m, 15 Wildcat fighters, 39 Dauntless SBD dive bombers, and 21 Devastator TBD torpedo bombers rumble into the air and head out towards the Japanese carriers. At the same time, the Japanese have launched their strike. 18 Zero fighters, 33 Val dive bombers, and 18 Kate torpedo bombers are in the air and heading for Task Force 17. As the American aircraft head for the carrier striking force, Lieutenant Commander Dixon, the commanding officer of Scouting Formation 2 from the Lexington, has left his assigned scouting path and flown towards the location of where the carrier striking force has been sighted. On reaching its reported location, heavy rain initially hides it from Dixon's view, but through a break in the rain cloud, he finally spots it. Dixon shadows, guiding the American strike onto the Japanese carriers by continually correcting the force's reported course, while Japanese Zeros flying combat air patrol move in to engage him. He flies evasively through the heavy cloud, maintaining contact with the carrier striking force over 2 hours, continually updating the course of the Japanese carriers to Task Force 17, while being hunted down by the prowling Zeros. At 10:32 a.m, aircraft from the Yorktown locate the Japanese carriers, but instead of making an immediate attack, the commander of Yorktown's Dauntless dive bombers decides to wait 20 minutes for Yorktown's Devastator torpedo bombers to arrive, so as to ensure they coordinate their attack on the Japanese carriers. However, the wait allows the Japanese time to launch more Zeros. With the arrival of Yorktown's TBDs, Yorktown's aircraft finally begin their anvil attack on the still visible Shikaku, encountering only light anti-aircraft fire. Trailing a mile behind the Zuikaku, Shikaku's only escorts are the cruisers Furitaka and Kinugaza, sailing astern of the large Japanese carrier. As the 7 SBDs dive on her, their bomb sights once again fog up as they had at Tulagi, and all 7 aircraft miss. Harried by Zeros, the 17 SBDs of VB-5 then launch their attack. As they power into their dives on the tightly turning Shikaku, Their bomb sights also fog up, but they press home their attack, and an SBD strikes her bow with a 1,000-pound bomb. As Lieutenant John J. Powers dies, the wing of his SBD is struck by a 20mm round from the Zero, but Powers pushes on, releasing his bomb at just 1,000 feet. Unable to pull up, Powers and his rear seat gunner are consumed by the massive explosion of their 1,000-pound bomb, ripping through the carrier. For sacrificing his life to ensure the accuracy of his bomb, Powers is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. With multiple large fires aboard, Shikaku is now attacked by VT-5's 9 Devastators, but they launch their torpedoes at too great a distance to be effective, and Shikaku evades. Shortly after, with many aircraft lost in the bad weather, some of Lexington's aircraft finally find Shikaku and launch their own attack. Only 4 of Lexington's Dauntlesses actually attack Shikaku, scoring another 1,000-pound bomb hit on the burning carrier. 11 of Lexington's Devastators now move into attack. They launch their torpedoes and pull out of their attack line, believing a number of their torpedoes have struck true. But once again, Shikaku evades all 11 torpedoes launched towards her. By the time the American aircraft depart the area, Shikaku is severely damaged and cannot conduct flight operations as her damage control teams work to suppress her raging fires. 108 of Shikaku's sailors have been killed, and she is forced to withdraw from the area. However, with her watertight integrity intact, she is at no risk of sinking as she steams for home. American losses are light, at 3 Wildcats and 2 Dauntlesses lost, for 2 Zeros shot down. At almost the same time as Yorktown's aircraft began their attack on the Shikaku, the Japanese prepare to begin their own attack. Having been detected by radar 68 miles out, 9 Wildcats have been scrambled to intercept them, but failed to make the interception as they approach Task Force 17. As the Japanese strike closes in, the Kates split into 2 groups in order to attack the American carriers from different directions. In comparison to the American attack, the Japanese attack is much swifter, but becomes subject to much heavier anti-aircraft fire. Zeros and Wildcats tangle with one another in the skies above Task Force 17 as the strike aircraft move in. The first to attack are the 18 Kate torpedo bombers, with 14 targeting the Lexington and only 2 targeting the Yorktown. 4 are shot down on their attack run. 3 Kates drop their torpedoes against Yorktown, but all miss. With Kates coming at her from either side, the unwieldy Lexington is able to maneuver enough to avoid the first 5 torpedoes, even letting 2 of the torpedoes pass right by her on either side. But her crew's luck runs out, and Lexington is finally hit by 2 torpedoes on her port side. One causes flooding, whilst the other will cause an ultimately mortal wound, jamming her elevators and cutting small ruptures in her port aviation fuel tank that progressively fills the ship with gasoline vapour. Just minutes later, 19 Vals from the Shikaku dive on the Lexington under intense anti-aircraft fire, and with Wildcats desperately trying to defend their carrier. Despite only 1 Val shot down on the attack line, they only secured 2 550-pound bomb hits, causing no critical damage to the carrier. 14 Vals from Zuikaku are the next to make their attack in an attempt to hit the sharply manoeuvring Yorktown. Again under AA fire, and with 2 Wildcats harassing, the Vals are only able to score a single 550-pound bomb hit on the carrier, this time causing structural damage. The fires are brought under control, and Yorktown soldiers on. 8 US aircraft have been shot down, and 13 Japanese, with a further 19 rendered irreparable. By the afternoon, it is clear that the battle has been very costly for both carrier forces, and that neither side is in any position to launch another substantial strike. Aboard the Lexington, the situation is deteriorating. At 12:47 p.m, the forward section of the carrier is shaken by a large explosion. With aviation fuel vapour spreading uncontrollably throughout the vessel as the afternoon goes on, she is severely shaken by 2 more huge explosions. Despite the best efforts of her damage control parties, the fires cannot be controlled, and abandoned ship is ordered. The venerable carrier is finally scuttled by torpedoes from an escorting destroyer. Upon being informed of the damage to the Shikaku and the air groups of the Zuikaku, and with the route to Port Moresby still blocked by Rear Admiral Crater's cruisers, Admiral Inoue calls off the operation. Aware the MO invasion force has turned north, and having already lost one of the US Navy's few aircraft carriers, Fletcher cannot jeopardise the safety of the Yorktown, and decides to move Task Force 17 south so she can be repaired. Whilst the Japanese remain in the area for a few days, hoping to re-engage the Americans, they realise the chance has gone and leave the area. At the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Imperial Japanese Navy has lost the light carrier Shoho, a destroyer, and a few auxiliary ships at Tulagi. The United States Navy loses the fleet carrier Lexington, oiler Neosho, and a destroyer. Both sides claim victory. By tonnage of ships sunk, the battle is a tactical victory for the Japanese, but by stopping the Japanese capture of Port Moresby, the Battle of the Coral Sea is a strategic victory for the Allies. The Japanese will now be forced to try and take Port Moresby by land over the Owen Stanley Mountains via the Kokoda Trail, where they will be ultimately stopped by predominantly Australian forces. Task Force 17 has inflicted enough damage to the Shikaku and to the air groups of the Zuikaku to ensure that neither carrier will be able to participate in the Battle of Midway in a few weeks' time, a potentially pivotal factor in its outcome.
Attention, fighters, 5 o'clock.
In June 1942, the war is going very well for the Empire of Japan. She has succeeded in her primary war objective, to secure the oil supplies of the Dutch East Indies, and has scored further territorial victories against the might of the British, US, Australian and Dutch forces in the West Pacific and Southeast Asia. However, knowing that the industrial power of the United States would outdo them in the end, the Japanese decide that they must deal a decisive blow to the remains of the US Pacific Fleet, specifically the aircraft carriers. The threat to Midway, a US Navy submarine mounting station for operations in the Pacific, would hopefully draw the US Pacific Fleet out of Pearl Harbor to fight, ending in its defeat. Japan hoped that with the combination of the loss of Midway, the threat to Hawaii that would come from the loss of its airfield and port, and the loss of their Pacific Fleet, the US would come to the negotiating table for peace. The carrier-borne Doolittle bombing raid on Tokyo in April further validated the need to destroy the US naval presence in the Pacific. On the 28th of May 1942, the largest assembly of naval vessels ever seen in the Pacific leave their bases across Japan and head east. Their commander, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, is confident of victory. However, little does he know that the US Navy Combat Intelligence Office in Hawaii has cracked the Japanese communications code and are broadly aware of their plans. US Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz has been alerted to the possible attack on Midway almost a month before the Japanese even set sail, and is assembling his defence. He deploys Task Forces 16 and 17, who under Admiral Halsey had executed the daring bombing raid on Tokyo a month before, to the northeast of Midway to lie in wait. Heavily damaged at the Battle of Coral Sea, the aircraft carrier USS Yorktown limps back to Pearl. She needs more than 2 weeks of repairs, which would put her out of action for the coming battle. But Nimitz is desperate for every carrier he can muster. 1,400 dockyard workers move into the ship en masse and labour around the clock. Miraculously, she is patched up to battle-ready condition and puts back to sea in just 72 hours. Yorktown sets sail with her escort fleet to meet with Task Forces 16 and 17.